Good evening, and thank you for joining us. This is the launch in a new series called Shaping Up. Of course, there has to be the big SH for South Hampstead, Shaping Up. But it's all about shifting our focus from behind the scenes. We've been looking over the last few weeks at some of the insights from people who have inside information on how COVID's been dealt with in a variety of settings. And now really it's about bouncing back. Time to bounce back. Obviously it's not all over and no one's pretending that's the case, but we're beginning to look at how the economy and society begins to recover. And therefore to launch this new series, we thought who better than our very own David Benigson in conversation with Simon Collins. I know there are plenty of Benigson family and fans here this evening, but David, just to say from the outset, this gives me huge nachas to think of you right in the thick of shy South Hampstead youth on a Shabbat morning. I knew I could always rely on you. You'd always have something very creative and out of the box to say. You were this dynamic blend of creativity and total brilliance and a maverick streak, which has taken you far in life. And that's what we absolutely love about you. And we're looking forward to hearing more information about what you're up to now, together with Simon Collins, who you're very close to, who you see as a colleague, as a mentor. Simon, of course, has had an illustrious career as the chairman of KPMG in the UK and many other roles. Although you're kind of leading the interview this evening, Simon, it would be great if you could share a little bit about what you're doing as well. And really now, the next little while is for you and Simon and David to engage in conversation, and hopefully there'll be a chance for the audience to pose questions at some point as well later on, either via the chat or just unmute when we get to that stage and you can vocalize your questions. But for now, Simon and David, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
I feel like it's my bar mitzvah or something.
Yeah, well, we'll look forward to you laning shortly. Ellie, many thanks to you and to everyone at South Hampstead, and ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Ellie, as you said, my background actually is part banker, part chartered accountant, and most recently I was chairman of KPMG until about 3 years ago. Since then, I've been chairing a number of companies and organizations, but increasingly advising younger companies, scaling companies, and CEOs and businesses that I'm interested in and that I believe in, usually involving technology, but always involving a founder or a leader that I see real potential in and believe in. And Signal AI is very much one of those businesses, and I'm delighted to be in conversation tonight with its founder and CEO, David. Cards on the table, I'll join you, Ellie. I'm a big fan of David too. I don't go back as far as you do with him, but definitely a fan. I'm also an investor in Signal, and I believe in David and his work. So during the course of the next hour or so, I hope that anyone who doesn't know David well will find out exactly why. As you said, Ellie, we're going to chat. I think we'll try and chat for 25-30 minutes or so, and leave plenty of time for everybody to ask David questions, or me if you've got anything to ask. We can take those questions live, but it's really helpful, I find, on Zoom calls if people can just scribble down the question in the chat function on the bottom of the screen, because that allows some questions to kick off without all the nightmare of unmuting. But we will of course take some live questions as well. David, I'm going to start with a curveball for you. Has lockdown made any difference to your shul attendance?
Well, no, that is definitely a tough place to start. It hasn't made much of a difference to my attendance because I haven't been going too much, admittedly. But what I would say, it's been fascinating to dial into a couple of the Zoom interviews that Ellie's been hosting, and particularly was great to dial into Saul Klein's one recently and get a kind of inside track on some of the work going on behind the scenes in relation to COVID. And as Ellie says, there's not too much I can share from a Signal perspective around that, although the Cabinet Office and the PM are a client of ours. But I can't reveal too much about that. But maybe can give a view about what we think is going to happen in the future and how the economy might be bouncing back. So
yeah, no, we'll definitely get there. But I think we're talking, as Ellie said, about opportunities, and I think people often look at startups, they look at entrepreneurs, they hear terms like unicorns, they see people getting rich in what appears to be very, very quick. Maybe after COVID, they'll see people getting poor very, very quick as well. But it's a sort of breathtaking process. My observation, being a bit closer to it, is always that it looks easy to be an entrepreneur, because by definition, we look at successful and established businesses, the people who founded them, and we go, yeah, that's easy. And we all feel we've got the sort of secret entrepreneur buried inside us, along with the novel. My observation, though, is it's much, much harder in practice to do that. So it'd be really interesting. Talk to us a bit about when and how you became an entrepreneur. Was it something you was, were you born to do it? Was it driven by an idea? Was it opportunistic? Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, I could give you the VC version, or I'll give you the venture capital version, where it all sounds very well thought through, and like some sort of godly a premonition that you've had, or maybe more interesting to give you the more realistic version, because I think you're 100% right. I think it's very easy, backward looking, to tell a very kind of structured and easy narrative, but I don't think entrepreneurship works in that way, and I think I would be lying if I didn't say I somewhat fell into it, or was gently nudged and helped into it by my parents, who are on the Zoom call. So I'll have to be factual as well, and very nice in what I say about them. But yeah, we founded the business 7 years ago in my parents' garage in Belsize Park. So we do have startups that begin in garages here in the UK, although obviously the pre-fabled garage stories are ones like Google, etc. And actually, funnily enough, when we were first raising our seed round of venture capital, and Saul, if he's on the call, Klein will attest to that, we invited investors to come in to the garage, and we could pitch to them. And then whilst we were pitching to them, we offered to get their cars MOT'd by Kevin the mechanic across the road, which one or two took us up on. But I think, I'm born into a family of entrepreneurs. Both my parents have run an incredibly successful executive search business together for 30 years. And the original seeds of the idea for Signal came from them, and came from my dad, who saw that they had been producing an email newsletter summarizing the news for their clients for many years. And it was hugely successful, and had many thousands of individuals who received that newsletter. And I think they saw that some of the people receiving that newsletter on a daily basis were big chairmen and big CEOs of the biggest companies around the world. And there was a question posed by my dad of why are these big business people relying on a manually curated newsletter that they get from a relatively small, medium-sized executive search firm here in London? Surely they have at their fingertips all the world's information and insight. And that began a kind of a journey of discovery. I had studied law, was kind of looking for what to do in my career, had tried out a few different things. But there was this question about whether there was an opportunity in taking that community, this recipient list of newsletter readers that they had built up over the years, and was there a question of why they couldn't get better quality information and insight. And I guess when we started digging into it and looking at it, we saw that there's this strange inverse reality where, despite never having had greater access to information, business leaders have never actually found it harder to use this overwhelming deluge of data to make better decisions for their businesses. And partly the reason why that is they just didn't have the tools and technologies available to them to sift through this morass of information, figure out the difference between fake news and real news, what was relevant and what was irrelevant, and what was coming around the corner that might impact their business, both either a risk or an opportunity. So we kind of grabbed at this idea and sank our teeth into it. And we quickly figured out that there was this new emerging technology called machine learning, or AI. And this was 7-8 years ago, before it became the hottest topic in technology. And so actually I started going on my own to meetups. I don't know if anyone knows meetup.com. It was acquired by WeWork. But if you've got a niche interest in stamp collecting or riding a bicycle, you can go meet up with other individuals who share your interests. And I started going to meetups for people interested in natural language processing and AI technology. And I would arrive in these odd basements somewhere in central London, and there'll be 4 or 5 academics, PhD data scientists sitting there. And it was, I was largely ignored. It was like being the uncool kid at school because I didn't have a master's or a PhD. But through going to these meetups, I built some relationships with some academics, and I built a relationship with one chap called Udo Krauschwitz, who was at the time a professor at UCL. And together we applied for a government grant through Innovate UK. We were awarded a grant of £150,000, surprisingly. And that enabled me to fund, along with the help of my parents, to bring on board what became my co-founder and our chief data scientist, a guy called Dr. Miguel Martinez, who was an expert in machine learning and AI. And together we kind of, in the garage, started building this product. And then what's super interesting is, the first time we ever built something, we had no user interface for our product. But what we started doing was we built an algorithm that could read the news and figure out whether the news was about a particular topic. So the first time we ever tried it, we started printing off pieces of paper because we had no user interface on the web. So we ran it through the printer, this algorithm, and it printed off all these documents. And the first algorithm we trained it on was figuring out executives moving jobs. And I remember pulling up each individual piece of paper and being pretty amazed that this machine learning algorithm had figured out accurately what all of this news was about. So that was the kind of first test that we ever run with Signal, and we kind of started building it from there.
And if we fast forward, one of the things I really admire and notice about you and the company today, David, is that you're laser focused on sort of why are we doing that? What gets better about the product or the customer experience, or something that there's no sort of lazy thinking about, it would be kind of nice to see what happens here. It's very, very focused. So if you fast forward from those early days in the garage and the nerdy meetings and the meeting up with academics, sort of just sketch a picture of Signal today and what it does and who it does it for.
Yeah, so today we're very fortunate that we have about 160 odd people around the world. We have offices in London, New York and Hong Kong, and we have over 500 customers. They're mainly big corporate organizations, the HSBCs and Barclays and Googles and Twitters of this world. And really we that core vision and premise hasn't changed much, actually. It's remained the North Star. The business is corkscrewed. That's what I feel like entrepreneurship or innovation is a little bit like. You kind of go round and round in these circles, but if you have this North Star guiding you kind of know that you're heading in the right direction. And we've always believed that these technologies will not replace jobs or automate jobs, to the same level that they will augment professionals. And our belief is that if we can aggregate all of the world's information that sits outside of a business and apply AI to extract these insights, we can help business leaders make better decisions for their companies. And we can help them spot reputational issues and risks. We can help them spot regulatory challenges and compliance issues, and we can help them spot emerging opportunities. And so today we provide a set of products and a set of service that hopefully deliver a set of insights that help communications professionals, CEOs, heads of risk and compliance at some of the world's largest organizations do that. And as you say, we've remained pretty fundamentally focused on solving that particular problem and what we believe building a new category of company that can change the way business leaders make decisions.
And along that path, one of the things I notice about successful entrepreneurs is, find a way of putting it politely, a sort of irrepressible, just going to bounce back. Nothing will swerve them from the path. And you see some people. Business can give you some real knocks, some real lows, some crushing sort of blows just when you think it's going right. And the entrepreneurs I've admired most have had such a sort of beacon guiding them, that they've just sort of somehow come back from that. I mean, tell us about a couple of the bumps in the road and how that shaped you as a leader.
Well, I think I've noticed on the list of attendees that there's two of my lawyers are on the call who are also part of the South Hampstead communities, but I won't get them to break client confidentiality and tell you about some of the challenges. I think there are always issues in growing a business, and particularly within this world of venture-backed companies. There's this whole premise of, you're growing as fast as you possibly can. I sometimes use the analogy, it feels like you're skiing down a black run ski slope and you're going so fast that you can't stop, you can't jump off. And that's kind of the crazy world of technology and venture capital that we live in, which is to grow your business as fast as you possibly can, to accelerate as quickly as you can. And with that kind of almost inorganic acceleration of your business comes lots of challenges. Some of them are related to hiring the right people. Some of them are related to ensuring that you can retain the right culture. The company that we were when we were 10 people rammed in a garage with no windows cannot be the same company that exists now with 160 people around the world, but you try to institute a set of values that the company can live by and that can be codified so that people can understand them and espouse them effectively. There are challenges in retaining customers and keeping them happy and looking after them. And my mum always taught me, you know, the customer's always right. So, you know, you spend a lot of your time ensuring that you're building the right things for them and delivering the right value for them. And lots of challenges around ensuring that you're building a scalable and commercially viable business that is trying to realize a big long-term vision in what can often be, in our case, certainly a very noisy and competitive market dominated by incumbents. So I think through that, you lots and lots of challenges are thrown up. I've certainly learned, as you were describing or alluding, to develop a kind of, you learn to build a stress muscle of sorts. So I can take rejection better than I could 5-6 years ago. And that's certainly something that you just kind of, the scar tissue builds up on. But most of all, I've kind of learned that and this might sound cliched, but I guess there's a reason why it's a cliche, is it all comes down to the people that you build, that you bring around you. You know, the team that you hire have to be better than you are, and they certainly are, in my case, much more experienced and knowledgeable. The advisors that you have, you're a great example. The board that you build, the investors that you try and select rather than them selecting you, they all make a massive difference, because you're trying to build a kind of net byproduct of quality that can help realize that vision and try and learn from the mistakes that you make rapidly.
And apart from how many lawyers you need, what surprised you on that journey?
Yeah, I guess the rapid change from stage to stage. So the first challenge that we went through in the garage was, God, does this technology even work? What are we doing here? Is this thing even going to exist? The second phase we went through was, okay, we've won a couple customers. Can we get 10 customers? And, our first few customers were so wild and wacky all over the place. It was like we were throwing mud at the wall and seeing what stick. We had a think tank, Margaret Thatcher's think tank. We had a fashion trend forecasting business. We had a kind of Wolf of Wall Street character who wanted to use our algorithms to pick stocks. And in fact, he was our first ever paying customer, and we've still got his check framed in our office. And I remember there's a good anecdote where we had never charged anyone for anything, so we didn't know how much to charge for our products. And I remember him phoning me up and saying, all right, I want to buy it. How much does it cost? And I said, oh gosh, I better call you back. So we sat down, the 3 co-founders in the business. We said, how much we charge? And my chief data scientist said, we'll charge him £1,000 a month. And my CTO said, we'll charge him £3,000 a month. So I picked up the phone and I said, hey, Nick, we're charging £15,000 a month. And he said, fine, I'll sign for 12 months. And I said, damn it, I should have charged £30,000 a month. So, you're kind of just figuring out who to sell to and how much to charge. And you're kind of making it up as you go along. And then you get to 30, 40, 50 people, 50 odd clients. And then it's like, wow, we've actually got the beginnings of a business here. How do we scale this? How do we turn it into something repeatable? And how do we, whilst the wheels are moving so fast, how do we build the processes and systems to sustain that in the long term? And now we've gone through a new challenge, kind of 100+ people, where you walk around an office and there's lots of people there you don't know the name of and you don't even recognize. And how do you find connectivity with these people and these individuals who in some ways are there to follow your vision? And I guess that then is when you have to really work really hard at doing some of those things around instituting the values, codifying them, hiring great people who then hire great people, putting some of these processes and systems in place to make the business scale. And I'm sure when we get to hopefully 200, 300 people, there'll be a whole new set of challenges. So I think the main bit that surprised me is how quickly from stage to stage it's changed, and how challenging each of those stages, each of the challenges that it's thrown up, but it's been very rewarding because you feel like you're constantly kind of growing and learning.
I think that's one of the biggest things I've noticed about the challenge of scaling, is that you start with any team or business. Implicitly, you always start by knowing the people around you, and there's an intimacy, there's a trust. And as you grow, as you scale, there comes a point in any size team or business where you walk through the door and someone says good morning to you and you don't know who they are, but they work for you. And it's great, and it's a result of scaling, but it also carries with it the responsibility that you have to send signals throughout the organization. You have to, as you say, embed the culture through a series of processes and other people, rather than that direct leader culture that you start with. So, and that's a crossover point for the business that I know, frankly, I'm not preaching confidence here. I know you struggle with, because you're hands-on. You want to be. You're curious. It's your baby. And part of scaling is that beginning to let go and build that trust in the people you've got around you. And I mean, as you're going through that journey live, is there any advice you'd give others going through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to that principle of great people make great companies, and I think you only have confidence to let go, because anyone who's founded a company knows that it's your baby, and it's that's the hardest thing. Giving people autonomy, trusting them, giving them space. I think the rewards are immense when that actually works, and so much of that comes down to the quality and the trust that you have in the individuals who work within that business. I also think that. I keep saying it, but that thing around instituting values, I think, is so important. And, I've always felt the business has held really strong values around diversity and inclusion, and being a very open and transparent place, and somewhere that people really enjoy working. But actually, that isn't going to be sustained or retained if you don't work really hard at it. And the question is, how can you do that practically? And it's just simple things. It's about that, as part of an interview process, you test people on your values. As part of your annual reviews, when you're going through salaries, you review them against those values. When you're doing shout outs at your all hands on a fortnightly basis, you make them encompassed within those values. And I think if you keep pressing that down, people start taking notice and living by them. And I think, given everything going on in the world, that's probably one of the most important things you can do as a leader, which is set an example, try and be clear about what the company should stand for, and then being really relentless about instituting that people live by those values.
And that must get much more difficult, presumably, in a sort of COVID environment where you haven't got physical mingling. Presumably, are you having to work harder to make sure that culture is maintained, that atmosphere is maintained?
Yeah, I mean, we're very lucky. We're a young company, and so the transition for us to working from home has been seamless and frictionless. And we all picked up our laptops and left our WeWork office, and everyone was set up and ready to go almost 24 hours later. And I know that's not the same for many other organizations who have struggled with that. And there are lots of challenges around that lack of intimacy that you get from being in the same place as people. And I think everyone on this call probably has experienced some level of Zoom drain and Zoom fatigue. At the same time, it's been amazing. It's actually been quite empowering how much you can over communicate with these tools, and Slack for chat and Zoom for conferencing, and all hands meetings and webinars and brown bags and all the rest of it. We've over indexed on those communication channels, and we've upped the cadence of those quite significantly. And actually, in some ways, I'm sure our company has never felt more integrated and connected, bizarrely. And that's kind of been one of the strange, I guess, byproducts of this whole COVID situation. Even with your family, you don't get to physically see them, but you've probably spent more time on FaceTime with them than you ever had before. So it's a strange paradox in that sense. But certainly we've had to up the levels of communication and significantly, and really up those touch points. And for example, onboarding new staff, we've been fortunate that we've been in a position where we've continued to hire during this period. And, we've had to really rethink, what is that onboarding experience? How do you get people to be immersed? We've buddied people up from different teams to ensure that they really get that kind of cross-company, cross-functional interaction and integrations. We really have to think very consciously about some of those elements. And then there's a question as well, which is, what happens post-COVID? And, many people are absolutely dying to get back into the office, in particular in our company, those with small kids, I think. But many people, also have totally enjoyed and benefited from the flexibility. And so I don't think we're going to go one extreme way or another. We're not moving from a totally remote working environment, because I think we would really lose something for the company. But I don't think we're ever going to go back to what we had before, which was totally co-located. And we definitely discouraged working from home prior to this. And I think some blended model where we provide flexibility for people to do a combination of the two, I think is definitely going to be the future for many companies. And certainly
I think that's right. I mean, I'm building a picture which is entirely anecdotal at the moment, but it's of office work going back to some sort of new normal that is about 30% of floor plate and a number of people permanently in offices of what it is today. So I think some of this working from home will really stick. So we talked a little bit about the sort of problems that come with COVID, but Ellie introduced us to talk about opportunities. I mean, in terms of very specific things that come from the crisis, you mentioned some work for Cabinet Office? I know you don't want to go into too much detail about it, but in terms of direct commercial opportunities or softer things like time to reflect and different perspectives, what opportunities do you think the crisis brings you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to be careful here because I don't think the opportunities are necessarily equal for everyone. And unfortunately, with something like COVID, it affects all organizations and individuals in very, very different ways. We're in an incredibly fortunate position. We're not quite Zoom, but where I guess the need for high quality information and insight has never been greater. And many of our clients rely on the data that we provide them to make even more critical decisions during this period. So one example, we've recently signed Selfridges, who have shut all their stores and unfortunately had to furlough a number of their staff, and as an organization are under a huge amount of pressure. But they used Signal to figure out when they should close their stores based on what other retailers were doing, and they're currently using Signal to figure out when they should reopen their stores and in what sequence. And so that information is critical. And for many of our clients, they use us in a similar dynamic. So the Cabinet Office, I can share, is the data is used. I'm not saying they use the data effectively. I won't go into that, but the data is used to brief the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary on how the UK government is responding to COVID. What are the key issues that are bubbling up around the world in relation to the topic? How are the other G7 countries approaching topics like therapeutics and vaccines and contact tracing? And how does that compare to what the UK government are doing? And how is all of that perceived? Because so much of this is about public perception and public sentiment in relation to how governments are actually responding to these crises. So it's fascinating to be able to provide that data to the government. And it's an amazing testament, I think, to the company that we're operating at that level and providing that level of insight, which is fantastic for us. So we've been super fortunate in that we've seen lots of opportunities like that, and we've continued to grow really strongly. I think we're very alive to the fact that the shoe might drop, like it might do, have done for other companies, and might do for others in the future too. If everyone's suffering, we're not going to carry on benefiting. So I think we're also trying to do our part to support our clients and to support organizations that we think do great work for pro bono, et cetera, to try and do our part to also contribute back to the community as well.
I mean, I don't know how techie our audience are, but if we go by me, and I'm not, there's a question in people's minds about AI at the moment. There's a lot of talk about it in terms of great things it can do for society or for sections of society. And you've got this sort of occasional nightmarish vision of robots taking over the world, or you've got an economic nightmarish vision of all the jobs being crowded out, and some people getting super rich and lots of tasks not done. On that sort of journey, I mean, I know you advocate augmented intelligence, you use it for good, but where do you sit on that debate?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's huge amounts of misinformation about the topic, unfortunately, and I think that there's a huge amount of hyperbole used on the topic of AI generally, and so that kind of vision, as you described it, of Terminator-style robots coming to take all of our jobs, and I don't see it as a reality today, and I don't think we're very close to it at all. And I think it's quite a dangerous premise to overemphasize. Because I think it gets at the wrong issues. I think there are some really fundamental challenges and issues with AI that aren't robots taking our jobs. First and foremost, I think these technologies will just embed themselves in our lives in a totally holistic way. They will form part of everything that we do. Going to the doctor, getting prescribed medicine, buying something online, watching a movie, reading the newspaper. AI already is embedding itself across almost every aspect of our lives. Where I'm not seeing it is this kind of general, get anywhere close to yet, is this sort of general intelligence concept in this kind of totally AIG driven world where with, the flick of a switch, all human life is snuffed out. The challenges, I think, are more nuanced than that. That doesn't mean they're less important. And they're more around things like ethics and bias within AI, and challenges around how we train these data sets, you know, for example, if medical professionals are going to use this data to prescribe medicine or diagnose patients, how do we ensure that there aren't biases embedded in the way that those machines and technologies work, that, I don't know, recommend incorrect medicine because of your race or because of your gender? You know, if these technologies are going to be used by the judicial system as part of the way judges make decisions or criminal law cases are settled, how do we ensure that there aren't, you know, inherent biases within the data? So I think there are much more, in some ways, challenging and nuanced questions that could cause much more significant impact in the short term, because I think we tend to overestimate the short-term impacts and kind of underestimate the long-term impacts of how this technology is going to manifest for us.
I've just got a couple of things. I'm conscious of time and wanting to open it up. A couple of things about you as an entrepreneur and what drives you. First thing is, if you think back, you know, you've been at this broadly sort of 10-ish years. If you think of your contemporaries, you think of people who went perhaps more conventionally, Accenture or law or medicine and so on. How do you feel about that? Do you feel a bit of envy, a bit of sort of thank God there, but for the grace of God go I?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think what's interesting is technology has become much more mainstream in the 7 years that from when I started it to now. I think it was a bit odd, having had a law degree, not to go and become a lawyer and do that traditional path and rather do what I did. At the same time now, if you look at the makeup of most technology companies, the brain drain from the best universities, the best companies, the banks, the law firms, government, unfortunately, is all headed in the direction. And, you know, the dream job is at Facebook, Google, or Signal. It's unfortunately not it's certainly not at the government anymore. And it's not really at the big banks, the Barclays, the HSBC, the Goldman Sachs anymore either, I don't think. So I definitely think there's been a real transition over the 7 years to what is deemed as conventional. And I think that's testament to the quality of the companies that have been built, both in this country and obviously in America and elsewhere, but also just the acceleration of how technology touches every part of our lives. And that software is really eating the world. It's consuming everything that we do. And even companies in those other industries are starting to act and try and behave like technology companies. So both in their cultural artifacts, but also even in the way that they approach doing business. So it's really interesting to have seen that transition over 7 years. You don't see it day to day because you're in and amongst it, but it certainly seems to have occurred. Do I envy my friends or peers who got normal 9 to 6, 9 to 7 jobs? Sometimes, but I think also at the same time, you know, you can do something as rewarding as start your own business. It's most certainly the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life, and no, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change it as well.
You get over that. I mean, the flip side, I guess, of the rewarding bit though is every entrepreneur. You're no different. I've seen you make sacrifices. You know, even sometimes fringe health sacrifices. Frankly, with pushing yourself, and other entrepreneurs the same. Do you need to be obsessive to take the opportunity of entrepreneurship?
No, I don't think so. No, and I don't think I ever have been overly obsessive. I think everyone who wants to be successful, whatever you do, has to work really hard, and that kind of goes hand in hand, whether it's sports, business, entrepreneurship, whatever. So I think, but I've been very lucky, and again, maybe a tenet I learned from my parents, which is that, you know, balance in life is quite important, and I think you know, self-care is important. I certainly wouldn't have been able to do this for 7 years if I would have just, you know, absolutely smashed it for the first 2, 3, 4 years. I would have burnt out, and you do see that quite a lot with other individuals. So I guess I haven't done that consciously. I think it's just my natural nature to chill out sometimes and take a break, and I think that's incredibly important. I think you have to be obsessed with the vision that you have with the company and try and craft that vision and make it come to a reality. But I don't think that particular obsession has to manifest in an unhealthy lifestyle or work-life balance. And I think you can be much more effective as a leader if you're well-rested, well-fed, well-exercised than you can if you're not.
And so final question while people tee up their questions for you, given our hosts and sort of virtual venue tonight, how important is faith to you? Does it guide you either overall or in any day-to-day decision making?
That's a tough one. Yeah, I mean, I think, well, what I would say is faith for me means many things. I think community is one part of that. And I think certainly community has been important. And as I said, there's not because I invited them, but I can see a couple lawyers who have worked with Signal. I know that there's investors from the community. I really do feel part of a community, and that is very supportive and helpful, and has been throughout. I also think faith has guided, hopefully, the values of the way I run my business, and the way that we do business, and wherever possible, we do try and do things ethically and inclusively, and try and treat our staff correctly. And one thing I've always been incredibly proud of is, today how you treat your staff is very public. If you go on Glassdoor, it's like a review forum. Like a product gets reviewed or a film gets reviewed, your company gets reviewed by your employees, and we've always had incredibly high recommendation rates and referral rates from our employees. And I think that a lot of that has been shaped. My experience and how I treat people has been shaped by the community I've grown up in, and the faith and Judaism more holistically. And so I feel very proud of that. And particularly now at a time when there's so much division, I think it's really important to be clear about what you stand for and the community that you come from, the background that you have, and not shy away from that. So certainly those elements and ingredients have all very much shaped my short experience as a leader of a business.
Great, thank you, David. As always, joy to talk to you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you.
Ellie, back to you, and let's open it up.
Well, thank you, guys. That certainly was a brilliant start, but it was the start up, and now we need to develop into a fuller conversation with other people's questions, comments. I'm certainly left wondering after all that superb insight as to what kind of opportunities are there now through COVID. Obviously, you're not going to sell your best secrets, but for those people who are trying to latch onto something, where do you see startups going as a result of COVID-19? What are the next big areas that you're prepared to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Look, I'm always wary of giving advice outside of the very specific domain that I operate in, because I think it's dangerous. So, and I'm not a futurist in that sense. But what I do think is that COVID will continue and has very much accelerated the onset of the adoption of many types of technology, and the digitization of the world has been ramped up a whole nother level. It was already on a very, very aggressive trajectory, and it's been ramped up a whole nother level. So anyone who is starting a business or operates in a business that can deliver products and services through a digital medium, whether that's communication, delivering your shopping, delivering information in our case, and underpinned by some of the emerging technologies that are kind of going to shape the landscape, I believe. So that's things like blockchain, artificial intelligence, et cetera, all of that I think has been accelerated and will only be more accelerated by what we've seen in COVID. So I think there's huge amounts of opportunity. Unfortunately, and my parents operate an executive search firm more in the world of bricks and mortar. They do a lot of work in digital as well, of course, but many of their clients are more traditional retailers and consumer goods businesses, and I think they will continue to struggle, unfortunately, during this period. And hopefully that lifts very quickly. But I think the businesses that are operating a digital first strategy are going to flourish, and that's reflected, rightly or wrongly, in the public markets today. So in the SaaS market, which is the space we operate in, software as a service, valuations of software companies have never been higher, despite the kind of abject chaos that we have around us. But Simon, maybe you have some better insights. You're more plural than
well, and never frightened to go outside my domain in a way you're too disciplined to do. So I mean, a few things I observed from the crisis around opportunities. I think if you look at the whole notion of supply chain for society and for businesses, we've been taught a big lesson about resilience rather than lowest cost. So I think there are massive opportunities to be part of a rethought supply chain and to help society and businesses rethink their supply chain around how resilient it is rather than just how cheap or just in time it is. I think the whole ESG, environmental societal governance regime for businesses is getting bigger and bigger. We've seen quite big kickback on social media and from customers about businesses that have been too slow around Black Lives Matter, too slow around customer refunds for cancelled bookings and things like that. So I think the societal obligations of business are, you know, businesses are getting reminded of that. And I think that brings opportunities for people to start more societally aware businesses or help other businesses be more in tune with the communities in which they operate. And then just a third one I'd pick is around the whole thing around, you know, the opportunities in health and medicine are just absolutely vast, whether it's picking up David's point, whether it's around digitization, sort of telemedicine and more remote delivery in a post-COVID world, or whether it's the whole mental health agenda, which has completely mushroomed you know, before COVID, but is getting a whole lot worse afterwards. Those are all big problems, but when society kicks out big problems, business usually responds with big opportunities, and some of the great companies of tomorrow are formed on those societal needs. So I'm hopeful about that.
Thank you. Other questions? Those on camera, behind camera?
You've stunned them into silence, Simon.
I'll just offer you an observation if you like.
Thanks. Go for it, Doc.
Well, yesterday, I mean, I'm at a hospital.
Hello. Oh, sorry, Brian.
Sorry. Can you hear me? Okay, so I'm a hospital doctor, and yesterday I did a telephone clinic. So instead of the patients getting on the bus and then on a train and then waiting an hour and a half to see me and all the rest of it, I spoke to them on the telephone. These were mostly follow-ups. It was all perfectly pleasant. It was extremely acceptable. Nobody moved a muscle. No frustration was involved. And you know, this is not something that would have happened pre-COVID, simply because the GMC, for example, has always taken the view that you know, the patient must be examined and what is not written down never happened, and so on and so forth. And all this has been shoved aside now in favor of digital communication. So it is, and not only that, but I could probably see 3 times the number, I put C in quotes, but see 3 times the number of patients that I would normally do in the space of a couple of hours. For example, yesterday, I saw 10 patients, in parentheses, in an hour. You know, this has absolutely changed everything. And as Simon says, it's going to change the supply chain. You know, we don't need to go and shop. I mean, obviously the big worry is that it will kill retail. I'm interested to know what other people think about that. So there's a statement for you. It's not really a question. It's obvious stuff, but everything, literally everything has changed.
One of the things I'd just add to that, I think when I'm hearing a lot, and David will hear the same thing, about people talking about 3 years or 5 years or 10 years worth of development over the last 3 months or 6 months. There's been such an intense incubator of ideas and practical solutions to get around problems that has been made. That's happened before after crisis. It's happened after epidemics. It's happened after war. And it brings fantastic innovation, but it also brings quite a long tail of problems for society, because regulation and law and ethics typically lag the speed of that innovation. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that move to things like telemedicine, digital transactions, those type of things, whether society can contain some of the risks and the exploitation that comes with it. But the innovation going on out there for those sort of things is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. Well,
Hi, can you hear me? This is Maurice Raynor speaking.
Maurice, take it away.
I'm involved in AI, in developing. I have a small software company which we are developing, but in the home improvement sector, where AI is used to establish a location within a room scene. What we are finding, which is quite interesting, is The clients that we've already got have been very, very active during this period. Many of them are retail clients that because they had a digital image and had a digital activity, have managed to sustain a fair level of their marketplace. We're finding that certainly over the last month, the inquiry level has gone up into our little business for those companies that do not have a digital element, recognizing that it's about time they did. My point really is that we really do feel, particularly in the world that we're in, that retail will definitely, in our mind, be affected. And the smaller retail companies in the home improvement sector, and I don't mean the big DIY groups, I mean the small carpet companies, various things, we're active in that area. We see a decline in them. We see that they will find it difficult to survive. I just wondered if David could enlighten and have a bit more view on that.
Gosh, I'm not the right person necessarily to answer that. My mum on the phone, maybe she's got a view about what's going to happen to retailers. That's her domain more than mine.
Get that?
She works with all of them.
In which capacity? What does she? I don't want this to be a private meeting, but just in which capacity?
Go on, Moira, over to you. I've done my interview.
Hi.
Hello. So, well, I work in executive search and I specialize in retail, well, in consumer, broadly speaking. So I work for most of the retailers. I work with all businesses that are consumer facing. So if you haven't got a digital presence in this day and age, I'm afraid you're a bit late.
Short and sweet as always.
Yeah. Well, what's your actual question?
No, I'm kind of confirming what you're saying.
Are you saying will bricks and mortar survive? Will retail stores survive? They will, because people love. But as long as they are experiential and you can go and experience something, in the same way, everything will survive if it is good and the best. And those that are not good will disappear. So what we call in our consultancy, the mushy middle, may just disappear. And it has been for a long time. And so what we've seen on the high street will probably go. But it might have gone anyway, but COVID has accelerated everything. But it was going to happen anyway. We were overshopped. It was too much of the same. And if you have a business that is special and different, and it will survive. But if it isn't, there will be no place for you anymore.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We're getting more than one Benigson all wrapped in. What a deal.
It's always 3 for 1.
That's a high street deal, exactly. There's a question in the chat now. Who are the leaders in the tech industry that have inspired and shaped your journey in building Signal AI?
It's a great question. I mean, like there are lots of big leaders in technology that I admire. I don't know if they've quite inspired me, but certainly that I admire and for their achievements. I think a few to mind are, I think what Mark Benioff has done with Salesforce is phenomenal, because he created a whole category of company software in the way that it's consumed by Salesforce just didn't exist prior to Salesforce. And what he's done is phenomenal from a kind of business feat perspective. I think Jack Dorsey probably has one of the hardest jobs in the world as CEO and founder of Twitter. Particularly because of how politicized that platform has become. And I think he actually he gets a huge amount of flack, but the way he navigates that job and that role and the political challenges that they face is pretty amazing. And it's pretty admirable as well that he gave, I think, a quarter of his whole wealth away recently to charity. And I think any business leader that makes a statement like that and lives, behaves with those sorts of values should be admired. I think the guys at DeepMind are frightening, but inspiring, and what they've achieved is pretty amazing. And the work that they do, elements of it, I think, could be really transformative. So I have great admiration for them. But I don't think they've necessarily inspired me. And I must admit that it's probably people closer for home who have inspired me more. And again, not to make this a Benigson loving, but my parents definitely have been great inspirations to me in the way they run and lead their business. And I think people from this community and from our family more broadly, I think I've always looked to, and what they've achieved as great inspiration for building a business. So that's probably been more direct in shaping things for me.
Great. And tell us about Mark Zuckerberg from and Facebook.
I left him off the list. I think it's very easy to vilify Facebook. I think, again, he's got one of the hardest jobs in the world right now. I don't think he quite knew what he was creating when he created it. And I certainly wouldn't watch the movie, which is a great movie, but it's not an accurate portrayal of the individual, I don't think. But I think that it's a good example of an organization that has gotten so big and is so influential that one person's leadership of it is probably not the right match and fit, and that there's not enough either governance in that business, or there's not enough government regulation instructing how that business should operate. It's kind of to the point that Simon made earlier, where innovation has outsprinted regulation. And there's a very, very strong and compelling argument to say that Facebook should be either broken up or regulated much, much more heavily, because the impact and influence that they have on the world and the penetration that they have into our lives is, I think really an overreach to what one organization should have. We certainly wouldn't let
Can I come back to the issue of winners and losers post coronavirus? And I take an example from our own synagogue situation, community situation. It is when the people business are coming together, connecting and bouncing off each other and feeling closeness. And the other kinds of businesses which are not in the faith sector, which do exactly the same thing. Now, it is true that we've been pretty successful in moving across to a digital platform. And one could argue that we have more people attending all of our activities, tonight is a good example, than ever attended when it was physical and they had to come to the synagogue. But I don't think that we, as a business, could survive like this forever. We need to come back into an environment. Maybe it's a hybrid, maybe we continue with some of this which has been so successful, but the heart and the soul and the core of our business is about people being together. And I can think of lots of other businesses out there in our bigger environment that depend very heavily, and that people need to actually be together in a physical space. And I think those sorts of businesses in a post-coronavirus world, with all of with the realization that these things are not going away, are going to be hugely, hugely affected. And I think that it is going to be the price for all of that will not just be the loss of revenue for those businesses, and possibly that they'll fold up. But I think there'll be a loss to humanity as well. I think we'll lose something very, very important and precious if we're not able to interact with each other in a physical environment with all the closeness and engagement that as social animals we need. I make this as a statement in terms of, this is a program about the success of digital environments. And I want to just counterbalance that by raising the problem of physical environments.
Yep. Dave, on that point, really, I also wanted to ask, as a follow-on from the statement, a question about whether the Jewish community can use your analytical data, the software, the notion of AI to kind of propel us forward. Because as your mum mentioned, I think our community at South Hampstead, more than just a shul, has been our slogan for a long time, and the Jewish community across the world have always wanted to continue being creative and thinking out of the box and moving on. But COVID has helped to accelerate that and make us realize that there's something new out there. But I'm going to hold that question and continue to discuss it offline, because really we're coming to the end of our session. I noticed that this evening there are some young people who have joined us, and whilst that's been true throughout our programs, tonight there are a few more of them. I think we should probably end with your mum's question in the chat, something around that issue of people who are currently at university or they were on a gap year in Israel. Now, of course, they're home, but still connected via Zoom and other platforms to their yeshivas, to their seminaries, etc. But they're beginning to ponder about what their next steps are. What's your suggestion? What are your thoughts for the young people who are joining us this evening? What's your best piece of advice?
I think just to enjoy those studies, enjoy this time to reflect, because actually I think one of the unfortunate things for young people, I certainly felt it over the last decade, is this kind of total 24/7 on constant acceleration of everything in our lives, information all the time. And actually, again, one of the challenges, but also paradoxical benefits of this last few months has been an opportunity to just slow down and not have FOMO and be rushing out to try and achieve things, or do, study for those next exams, or get a job internship, or see friends. I think it's probably been quite rewarding and enjoyable for a lot of people. And I think there's a huge rush and pressure for young people to go out and be successful and present their lives in a wonderful way on Instagram. And I don't think that's necessarily reality, nor the best way everyone needs to live their lives. So, it's very easy to look from the outside, as I think was said by Simon at the beginning, and say, oh, entrepreneurship, it's so hard to get into, or it looks easy looking backwards. I think, I really only got going on that in my mid-20s. I think there's lots and lots of pressure on people at a young age, and I think they should just enjoy their youth. That would be my advice.
L'chaim to that.
Have fun.
A great climactic note on which to finish. Thank you very, very much, David, and Simon. An extremely engaging conversation, and thank you very much to everybody who's joined us, the Benigson clan and beyond, the lawyers, the fan club. Georgie, thank you to you and the whole team at Signal. We've really enjoyed this evening, and hope that it's the beginning of a conversation, and hopefully the bounce back is on. We should all continue in good health, feel positive about the next steps in all of our lives. And
next, we'll get AI to get me a haircut during quarantine. That's what we'll get. That's where we're going.
Let me know. Although I'm enjoying my hair.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you. Thanks, Ellie.